Let's move over to Iran. We're going to talk about something a little bit more crypto native, and that is the use of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for moving payments across borders. Sanctioned countries like Iran are often the case studies for these conversations because you want to look at the permissionless nature of crypto and the censorship resistant nature of sending money across borders. And so Iran is always a great case study, even more in depth because of the nuclear prohibitions that are around Iran, including the sanctions from the United States and other Western countries. We've seen from self-reports at a semi-official news agency within Iran, Tasnim. I say semi-official because it is difficult to parse what is official media in Iran and what is state-sponsored and otherwise. According to this new report, they're going to allow limited uses of cryptocurrencies across borders for purchases and for settling transactions, including larger purchases, for example, selling cars, being able to move that in and out of the country. This has big repercussions over the long term because Iran has been sitting in this place where it's not allowed to use foreign currency like the dollar. It's been blocked from using a lot of payment systems out there because of its regime and because of its nuclear ambitions. And crypto, the fact that you can move money permissionlessly through the mining or validator networks and not be touched by anyone, really is dangerous to SWIFT and any other sort of US hegemonic systems that are incumbent to the global financial system. This might seem like a small story, but I think it sort of builds up into a case of a bunch of other stories we have about Iran over the last few years about their interest in crypto, their interest in mining Bitcoin, their interest in using cryptocurrency to settle across borders. Zach, I want to throw this one to you, get your take on it.
Yeah, the official import order was worth some $10 million, according to one of the reports. And I'm just curious who's on the other side of this deal right now. Who is using these rails to sell stuff? That to me is the interesting bit. It's curious to see some of these networks emerge where, certain countries can pay outside of the traditional financial rails. So if this is a viable use case or an actual use case of crypto payments, then it should be discussed. It's rather interesting. I think it does give people in the regulatory world pause, right? If this is a way for countries to evade sanctions, if it's a whole new end around, whether it's North Korea or Iran or Cuba or what have you, governments that are disfavored by certain world powers, that to me is something that we've heard a lot more noise about it, and this is actually the proof in the pudding that this potentially is happening, right? So whether or not this fuels additional regulatory conversations around how to rein it in, how to make sure that some of the intermediary firms that are touching these payments along the chain are implementing sanctions, be they OFAC or others, and make sure that those sanctioned entities aren't able to do transactions such as this. I think we might see some additional noise around that, and we might see some additional pushback being like, well, hey, we're creating a parallel financial system that is helping to subvert national policy interests. Maybe that's not good. And I think in the conversation around OFAC, Tornado Cash, and sort of this maybe a looming crackdown on some of these technologies, this is certainly a data point that should be folded into that conversation, for better or worse. Jen, curious for your thoughts, though.
Zach, as I put my hand up, you took the words right out of my mouth and said them a lot more eloquently than I would. I think that we see that, when we look at how the U.S. government was looking into, what's going on in El Salvador. I think as more and more countries start to take on crypto and take on Bitcoin and are using them for transactions that could, supervent sanctions, regulators in the U.S. look at this and they get very, very scared. And so, Will, I totally agree with you. This seems like a small story, but there's a much bigger picture here. And I think we're going to see regulators react very quickly to them as a lot is happening in the regulatory space right now. We're getting the executive order reports soon. There's a lot of talk around sanctions and Tornado Cash. So I think we're going to see regulators react quickly. Will, what do you think?
Yeah, these small stones end up making large buildings, so they're important to pay attention to. And I like the fact you brought up the Tornado Cash part of this, Zach. I think my mind is already drifting away from that because the crypto news cycle moves so fast. But that Tornado Cash story is not gone, right? That developer is still in prison and waiting trial for charges we don't know about, right? And so that is how seriously these Western countries are taking protecting their financial systems, right? They are going to imprison developers, not charge them with anything formally. And we'll find out about the fact afterwards. So if Iran's moving forward with this, I would expect more pressure. And like we talked about yesterday, we're still waiting to see what the Biden administration's executive order layout looks like going into the next few weeks.